I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the EV of the moment, the 2022 Hyundai Ioniq 5. The Ioniq 5 is one of those rare cars. It's such a fantastic piece of rolling theatre. It just goes boof. Surprisingly self-sustaining motorsport weapon. Actually represents what the Korean figure is for future. The Ioniq 5 is one of those rare cars that actually looks almost the same as it did in the concept version of it. And we can only be extremely thankful for that because we have what we have right here, which looks exceptional in my opinion. It's actually based upon the 1974 Hyundai Pony concept car from the Turin Motor Show, which was designed by Giorgetto Giugiaro and became a very boring 1975 sedan, which was the first ever car produced by Korea that wasn't someone else's. So you kind of think, well, how did that inspire the Ioniq 5? Well, I think it's all about that Italian design heritage. And I suppose if you squint, you can probably see a little bit of Lancia Delta Integrale in this car, but the pony reference comes from those headlights at the front, those quad headlights, and that sloping rear pillar. It's all about stylistic and absolutely nothing to do with the technology that's underneath, because there's tons of it. If the face of a car is representative of the style, then the front of the Ioniq 5 is what the car is all about. To me, it looks a little bit like if Grace Jones was an android. It has more than an element of sort of 70s, 80s futurism about it, but doesn't look like it's a car from the past. It really looks like a futuristic car. The headlights are what Hyundai calls parametric pixel. So they're made out of all these little pixels, and actually the silver panel that runs across the front of the car also has lighting embedded in it. So when the lights aren't on, you're just looking at the front and it's just a sort of a silver panel. But when the lights are on, it has little slits all the way across it, which is just amazing, intriguing kind of lighting signature that nobody else is doing. Probably should point out that the parametric pixel thing was about the Koreans trying to find something that symbolized what this car stands for. And the shape of some of the lighting actually represents what the Korean figure is for future. So unintentional cool there. The black panel in the middle is what Hyundai calls the sensor panel. So it hides all of that ugly camera crap that often ruins the fronts of lots of cars, Mercedes S-Class, by having a big ugly panel. It's all hidden there in a nice little bit of sort of 80s nightclub chic. At the bottom there we have these little slits which replicated again at the back, which also look a little bit like something that you would have seen someone wear in a 1985 video clip, but somehow they don't look daggy on the Ioniq 5. Among the other technology at the front of the Ioniq 5 is what's under this aluminium clamshell bonnet, which is a first for Hyundai. Is a 70 kilowatt electric motor at the bottom of here, which is in this all-wheel drive variant. The rear drive version doesn't have that there, and so the rear drive version has 57 litres of storage space here, but the all-wheel drive one has 24, which is not much, but it is perfect for storing all the cables and stuff for charging this intriguing vehicle. Among other bits of technology are these two panels down here that will open up and work with fans to cool the battery when it's using a 350 kilowatt charger, which is something that the Ioniq 5 can do. Also, notice the paint. This one's called Lucid Blue. It's this beautiful metallic. It's a non-cost option. It's one of 6 colors. The only one that is an option is matte gold, which is $1,000. And unusually for a car, matte gold is the hero hue. All of them are quite soothing, you know, teal, silver, grey, black, white, if black is soothing, but they're all fit nicely in with the eco focus of this car. This variant also is a launch variant for Australia, which is equipped with everything. And among those inclusions are these parametric dual 20-inch alloys, which will be very easy to curb if you're not careful, because the wheels do sit right on the edge of the body, although these specific Michelin Pilot Sport EV tyres do sit out a little bit from the rim, but they are extremely complex, look really good in some lights, as does the whole car itself. Now, another cool little bit of tech is these flush door handles. As you notice, I walk up to the car with the key on me and they present themselves, and they're reasonably easy to use, although perhaps not quite as good as those full pop-out ones like on a S-Class or a Range Rover Velar. If you're walking past the car and you have the key on you, it'll present itself like that as if you're about to get in, but as soon as you go past it, it auto-locks again. But it doesn't auto-lock once you finish driving and walk away. Now, there's another cool piece of technology at the back here, and that's actually the charging port itself. It's only activated, as far as I can tell, by the key. You just hold the button down on here and it opens this cute little flap by itself like that, which is really cool. There's also a lot of technology in the way the Ioniq 5 charges. It has the ability to take 800 volt charging, which is a 350 kilowatt hour fast charger, of which in Australia, for example, there are several between Sydney and Melbourne, so you could easily do a fairly considerable interstate trip pretty effortlessly, especially given that this goes from 10 to 80% charge on ultra fast charger in 18 minutes, which is pretty quick. If you were doing it at home on an AC supplied like wall box charger, it takes a bit over 6 hours, so you could do it overnight. But you know, even if you were driving around and at a shopping centre, for example, and they did have ultra fast charging, you can add 100 kilometres worth of distance to this car in just 5 minutes. Because it has the ability to handle multiple charging infrastructures, the Ioniq 5 can also use its motor and inverter to boost 400 volt charging to 800 volt charging. So even if it's not getting an ultra fast charge, it can actually do that internally to make this a genuine ultra fast charging car. That said, if you only have a 50 kilowatt charger, which is just called fast charge, you can do the same 10 to 80% charge that takes 18 minutes with an ultra fast one in 62 minutes in this all-wheel drive. So you could go shopping or go to the gym. Oh, and it does this, which is also very cute. Now, continuing that electric story at the back here is these little slits down the bottom here, which is really just a styling flourish. Hyundai says they look like the cooling vents on 80s electronics, but I reckon they look like the sunglasses you'd wear to an 80s party. Either way, I think they do look really cool, but they're not as cool as the parametric pixel lighting at the back here, which is even cooler on the rear of the Ioniq 5, in my opinion, than at the front, particularly for this cool little red key line along the bottom here. It's subtle, but really easy to see from a distance, and all of it gives this car such a great presence. About the only thing it doesn't have is sequential indicators on either end, but then, you know, maybe in the future. In terms of the size of the Ioniq 5, it does look a little bit like a 1.5 scale hatchback, because when you see it in pictures, it looks really cute and pert, and its proportions are absolutely that, but in reality, this is not a small car. It's like as wide as a Santa Fe or a Sorento. It's on a 3-metre wheelbase, which is like Palisade-esque, yet it's only 4.6 metres long. So there's something about the proportion of this that says hatchback for supersized people. Part of the thing that I'm saying that for, though, is because in the boot here, it's not quite as big as what you'd expect of something that's trying to be an SUV. In here, it's 527 litres, which is still quite a lot, but the floor here is relatively high. It does have a 155 kilowatt electric motor under the back of this all-wheel drive version, but it also has a little bit of storage. There's some down here for the vehicle to load charger. There's a luggage net underneath here, and there's another space down the side here. So there's a little bit of hidden stuff. When you flip the 60/40 backrests down, it is a dead flat 4. There's 1,587 litres, but this is more like a supersized hatchback rather than a large SUV rival. The only real feature it has in here of any note is a 12 volt outlet, but there's so many other things to concentrate on here that is sort of whatever. You can run stuff from the charger here, hence the vehicle to load. You could run a coffee machine or a hairdryer or maybe electric barbecue. That's pretty cool, but not as cool as the inside. The reason why I'm lying down in here is because the Ioniq 5 interior is all about a Zen experience. It's all very light coloured, and I'm sitting on Relaxion front seats, which looks like relaxation misspelled, but are actually designed to achieve a zero gravity position and a kind of a weightless posture. So when you're charging the car, you can do this rather than in its Tesla rival, watch Netflix. It's meant to be the opposite of too much screen time. Now you just use the button on the side here to push it up. It does have a little under thigh bit here. Hyundai says it's like replicating a business class experience, but I think it's more premium economy because business class seats mostly go flat. Anyway, the passenger can also do it as well, as you can see here. And the general colouring of the interior continues that vibe. It's all light materials. The two 12.3-inch screens here are using a white backing rather than black to just keep it all nice and light and breezy. We have a full glass roof in this launch variant Ioniq 5, which has everything you can possibly squeeze into one. And also the materials in this car use an element of recyclability. Hyundai says there are 32 of these to make the yarn for the seats and the headlining, using up to 40% recycled material. There's also a trim called Paperette, which is like a polyethylene resin that's used for the detailing in the doors, although I can't quite work out which part is Paperette, but apparently it's there, so that's important. And even though it has leather, it uses flaxseed oils instead of animal oils to do things like bonding and whatnot. There's also corn and sugarcane in here somewhere, but I can't see exactly what that is. Either way, it's a step in the right direction. It's not completely recyclable, but it is definitely a step. Part of that Zen experience too is about minimalizing what you're looking at here. Now, there is still quite a lot of screenage happening in front of me, but it's all fairly calming. The two-spoke steering wheel here doesn't have too much crap going on. The gear selector is just this prong that sticks out over here that looks like Hyundai's take of a Mercedes-Benz one. It does have a little twist thing on the end that does take quite a bit of getting used to. You don't always get the gear at the right time, but it does declutter the interior, and that's what this is about. So in the bottom here, we have a completely flat floor because we're on the e-GMP dedicated electric architecture. It means that there's no transmission tunnel. There's no legacy of an internal combustion engine here. This is starting from scratch. So in the center here, we have a little tray that's got sort of carpet way down there. And if you want to run Apple CarPlay, you do have to plug it into that USB port there and put your phone down there, which is at least out of the way. It's next to a little 12-volt outlet down here, and it runs out of this lovely slick screen here. In this variant, which is the top spec for now, has an 8-speaker Bose stereo, so 7 speakers plus the subwoofer that takes up a bit of room in the boot, and it does sound really good. Probably not top shelf good, but pretty good. The controls here too are all nice and slick. All this HVAC control here. There's a few buttons here, but it's all about minimalizing those as well. And because we have this center console here that moves by up to 140 millimeters via a little lever here. It's called Universal Island, according to Hyundai, which is meant to maximize front and back. I actually prefer to drive it here because it's kind of in the way a bit, and you can't really slide the armrest here. You slide it via moving the whole thing. So this just lifts up and has a little tray there, but it doesn't really go back and forth. It just sort of semi goes out of the way. Having all this here means that there doesn't have to be other stuff in the center here. So, for example, for the storage here, we have a glove box that is a tray. It's a 9.4 litre tray. And you can actually fit more than just the owner's manual in there, which is unusual in a modern car. In here, we have the two cup holders in the center here. There's nothing down the front here other than the lever. But in the middle here, we've got two USB ports. We've got the wireless phone charging there. And in the center here, there's this tray here that currently has Nature's Curse, but can also fit shoes, handbags, shopping, whatever you want to put in there. As for the doors too, I should really point this out. This is a Hyundai that can fit a 1 litre camping bottle in the door for the first time ever, although the back only takes 600s. So it's starting to get to that point where it has enough utility. Among the other little surprise and delight things in the interior is this little panel here, which I actually thought initially was the stereo speaker, but it's actually for pinning little pictures on. So if you want to have one of like an ocean with a palm tree, or your dead grandmother, or Zac Efron, then you can just pop that over there and just be comfortable in the knowledge that you're watching someone who's looking over you, caring about your driving. Now on the steering wheel here, we have a drive mode button, which is just like Porsche, which is fine. It's a really good idea, but here it's just a push button to switch between eco and normal and sport. And we have these sort of capacitive buttons here that I do keep bumping the voice activation one when I've been driving it quickly, but they're all reasonably easy to use, although they are black and not white. So I suppose it's more of a stylistic thing than anything. And the armrests, which are just nice and slick, smooth all the way, dipped down the back to grab them, and has a little indented bit there for your hand, and this nice soothing ambient lighting that can also be changed in multiple colours. Finally, to the detailing of the Ioniq 5's interior. It's not about being plush and luxurious in here, it's about offering a whole bunch of different textures and interesting design. Even the speaker grills have like two different strakes going different ways. We have strakes across the dashboard here that are obviously mimicking electronic cooling. We have these lovely perforation on the leather on the seats, as well as at least 4 different trims on the doors. We have another different trim along the cowl along here, and also this cool little design detail, which sounds kind of naff, but I actually think is quite cool, and that is having a minus on the brake pedal and a plus on the accelerator pedal. I don't know whether the Ioniq is first car to do that, but it's still kind of cool. About the only place where the minimalism starts to get a bit too much is when you have to hit heating and ventilation in the screen and then go up and down here, rather than just having a button somewhere else or on the doors like you do in the back seat. And I probably should point out that if you don't like the Zen and want a bit more black, you can go black, but it looks so much better in white. The electrification story continues in the back of the Ioniq 5 because this 60/40 split seat has its own electric adjustment, as you can see right now. It moves through 135 millimeters of travel, and we can also do it from the seat here. This universal island here moves through 140 millimeters and is in its rearmost position right here. Hyundai says that if you move the front seats all the way forward and put a laptop here, you could host your own Zoom meeting from the back seat, but that sounds like something that someone came up with during lockdown rather than when this car was going through its design process, but it would be possible. Now, as my helper here moves this all the way to the front, it gives you that much more room. And so what you have down here is a pair of rear USB ports and a little rubberized tray here. Moving the console forward does give a reasonable amount of room because we have a completely flat floor, but this position here is more about the comfort of the cushion rather than the comfort of the backrest. It's kind of hard. It is usable, but it is all about sitting in the outer 2 positions here. This seat is really good. Now, I have a 10 position backrest behind me. I have a theatre position seating in front so I can see up and over what's going on. The air vents here, because of the moving console, are in the door, so you have 2 B-pillar vents. You also have the seat heating buttons in the door, like I mentioned earlier, rather than hidden in a screen. And we have more electrification in the ceiling because while this glass roof doesn't move, the actual cover of it parts from the middle and goes outwards, which is really cool and is like the sea parting for an electrified future, which is what we're all going to have to get used to. The other 2 things I should point out is that it does have a center armrest with a pair of cup holders here for the 2 people this seat is really designed for. I've got heaps of legroom here with the back seat set all the way back, but I don't have a whole lot of toe room. It's not uncomfortable, but it is a little bit less than you'd probably expect for a flat floored car. Safety-wise, the Ioniq 5 features 7 airbags, including a centre front airbag, AEB with pedestrian and cyclist detection, as well as collision avoidance assistance for junction turning and crossing, lane changing, blind spot, oncoming traffic, and side evasive assist that provides steering assistance. There's also a blind spot view monitor, driver attention warning, lead vehicle departure alert, auto high beam, speed limit assistance, lane following and lane holding assistance, reversing AEB and cross-traffic collision avoidance, rear occupant alert, safe exit assistance, adaptive cruise control with stop and go, and a 3D surround view monitor with front and rear parking sensors. In other words, it has everything. The combined consumption figure for the Ioniq 5 is 19 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and we averaged 18.9, so almost bang on that claim. The distance WLTP number for the car is 430 kilometers for this all-wheel drive version, whereas our consumption worked out at 383, so pretty close given that this wasn't an economy drive, this was a road test of a brand new car. The warranty for the Ioniq 5 is 5 years or unlimited kilometers like any other Hyundai, whereas the warranty for the battery is 8 years or 160,000 kilometers. The servicing is every 12 months or 15,000 kilometers, with the 5-year total coming to $1,684. If you've watched this far in the video, then please subscribe below, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on what you think about the Ioniq 5's design, because I think it's really cool and it'd be good to know what you guys think. Also, if you want to know what it drives like, then happy to leave a comment at the end about that as well, because I'm about to tell you how fun this EV is to drive. When I started driving at home from work and just driving it in an urban situation over fairly challenging roads, speed humps and whatnot in Sydney, I noticed that it seemed quite softly suspended and that I suspected that those 20-inch wheels with 255/40 tyres might be a little bit too much for the car. I thought this is going to fall down a little bit on a country road and these wheels are going to be too much, but they are absolutely not. Like, the Ioniq 5 has these latest technology frequency dampers that aren't adaptive, but do a really good job of being supple over bumps, but also giving the car really good body control. And that applies in both sport and normal modes. Now, the difference between the two is that sport weights up the steering a little bit, makes the throttle response more obvious, and reduces a little bit of the regenerative braking, which I currently have here in iPedal mode, although I'll talk about that in a minute. And it also sends a bit more drive split to the all drive at the back, because this is the all drive version. And it does have a little bit of rear end bias, because even in normal mode, you can kick this car out of a corner and it will actually shift its tail a little bit and use its rear end to really drive it out. It has a slight flavour of Audi RS, which is great, and also makes it not surprising that Hyundai is considering / developing an N version of the Ioniq 5, and we can't wait for that. As for the all-drive system, it can be split into 50-50, and it actually does that of its own accord when it notices that something has been attached to the accessory tow bar that you can order for the car, because it does have a 1600 kilo braked towing limit, and then it automatically locks itself into 50-50. So this all-drive setup in this car is actually really quite clever. Of the drive modes, Eco gives maximum regen braking, a fairly doughy throttle, normal treads a nice line, and sport is definitely the one to choose in twisty corners, but it's not that much more keen than normal. There's also a snow mode as well, but we don't need that in Australia right now. As for the regenerative braking, it has multiple settings and it is excellent. It is all driven by these two little paddles on the column here. It can go from level 0, which gives the Ioniq 5 an amazing amount of momentum. You can just let it coast along and it does it itself, but it doesn't really provide that much regen. Whereas when you go to level 1, level 2, level 3, or what I've got it in now, which is the next step called iPedal, you basically barely touch the brakes. You don't need to brake at any intersection, and the way that you just back off and feels very natural in the way it's slowing down and just stopping behind other cars is effortless and really quite great. Like, it's probably the best regen system I think I've driven in terms of feeling natural and really kind of building the range of the car pretty well as well. I would point out though that sometimes you do initially tend to over brake when you need to brake in situations, because there is quite a lot of regenerative braking, and I suspect that if you're jumping from car to car, having spent a lot of time in an Ioniq 5, that you might actually potentially under brake because you're so used to the car doing so much of the braking itself. The greatest thing about the regen braking though is the fact that it actually does all of the cornering braking for you itself. So when you use iPedal and brake into a corner, it's actually transferring load onto the outside front wheel like trail braking and left foot braking does in actual proper driving in a car. So by doing that, it then transfers weight onto the outside back wheel and just makes the Ioniq 5 this surprisingly self-sustaining motorsport weapon. Like, it feels really good. It's actually chuckable. And this car weighs 2,100 kilos, and it's not a small car. A 3 metre wheelbase, 4.6 metres long, and that weight, and yet there's just something so satisfying about driving the Ioniq 5 quickly. As for performance, the rear-wheel drive Ioniq 5 only has 160 kilowatts and does 0 to 100 in 7.4 seconds. But this all-wheel drive one has 225 kilowatts, 605 newton meters, and does 0 to 100 in 5.2 seconds. Now, people have actually criticized this car for not being fast enough, because 5.2 just ain't good enough for an EV in nearly 2022. But I think that that is rubbish, because the torque that the Ioniq 5 all-wheel drive has off the line is basically like jettisoning a rocket. It just goes boof, like it's quick and super, super smooth. Where the performance of the two of them tend to sort of blend together is in the rolling acceleration. The benefit in the all-wheel drive is all at low speed with that torque and off the line. Hyundai claims the 80 to 120 time for both cars is 3.8 seconds for the all-wheel drive and 4.7 seconds for the rear-wheel drive. So there's a difference there, but it isn't dramatic. As for the everyday driving experience, the Ioniq 5 is supple. It's really quiet, surprisingly quiet. In fact, you can barely hear any tyre noise at all. And these front seats here, the driver with 2-position memory, are really comfortable. You also have a tremendous view. The cowl in the car, which is the base of the windscreen, isn't miles forward. It's actually quite close to you, which gives it that kind of interesting proportion on the outside, but it just gives you this panorama of vision, and it makes it feel really modern sitting behind the wheel of this very appealing and enticing Hyundai EV. If you're on the market for a reasonably premium EV and have been considering something like a Tesla Model 3, then your world is about to get a lot more interesting, because you have the choice of something like the Hyundai Ioniq 5. And then not too far down the track, the Polestar 2, the Genesis GV60 and the Kia EV6. All of these cars being under $100,000 or near enough to, which is these days relatively affordable. But this car here is the star of the show for today, and the Ioniq 5 is a really, really good car. I think when you start first driving it and you go, yeah, it's pretty smooth and it looks pretty cool and it's probably bigger than I expected, the more that you ask of it, the harder you drive of it, and the more that you use it, the greater the Ioniq 5 becomes. It's such a fantastic piece of rolling theatre, yet it's also really efficient and really fun to drive. It's kind of what's not to like about it. I really love it. I wish it came in more colours, but that's going to come in the future. And potentially this $75,900 launch variant, which is what the all-wheel drive costs, is maybe a little bit too far out of your price bracket. But in the future, in 2022, there will be more variants of this car once production becomes available, and they will be less expensive than this fully featured one here. I should finally point out though that of the initial 400 build for this car, 240 have already been sold as of late October. The next 160 aren't going to be in production until December 21, and they're likely already spoken for in the first batch of 2022. So if you really want the headline EV of the moment, you're going to have to be a bit patient, but it's definitely worth the wait.